I want to bring my panel in. Heidi Przybyla, an MSNBC political analyst and White House reporter for USA Today. Kate Kelly, who covers Wall Street for the New York Times. And Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com, professor at Morgan State University, and an MSNBC political contributor. And as always, we're here to help at MSNBC. So if you don't know Roy Moore well, in addition to some of that information Kristen just shared, I want to share that Roy Moore has said that 9/11, September 11th, was God punishing perverseness. That's right. That's what Roy Moore thinks. So, Jason, let's start with you. Let's say this guy wins in December. Not what does this say about Roy Moore? What does this say about what's happening to the United States of America?
Stephanie, this is what I wrote. I said this choice was between the Ku Klux and the Klan. Like, both of these guys are hardcore conservatives. This isn't about ideology. This is about, Roy Moore is a birther. Roy Moore, in addition to what he said about homosexuals, he was in favor of basically checking the papers of Latino people. This is a horrible indicator of what this country can actually elect. We don't want more people who support Donald Trump. We want conservatives, we want Democrats, we want liberals, but people who support this sort of white nationalist, America is only for certain kinds of people. He was okay with what he said about Charlottesville. That is a dangerous precedent for this country. I think the Republicans should be concerned.
And let's say one more time, President Trump in that tweet said, Roy Moore's a great guy. I want to share what Stephen Bannon said.
You're going to see in state after state after state people that follow the model of Judge Moore, that do not need to raise money from the elites, from the crony capitalists, from the fat cats in Washington, D.C., New York City, Silicon Valley.
Okay, that's pretty rich, because if you think about Steve Bannon, former Goldman Sachs employee, who backs him? The Mercers, the richest of the rich New York hedge funders. So please, Steve Bannon, I'm not going to listen to that for 1 millisecond. Kate, can you talk for a moment about, did President Trump really back Luther Strange? Because if you think about Steve Bannon and Trump and the base, could Trump not turn this quickly and say, you know what, Roy Moore's my guy after all. I was just doing it for Mitch McConnell because I was trying to stand with my party.
Well, that's exactly what he is doing. And the trick with Donald Trump is he has taken many sides of many issues over the years, going back to the Iraq War.
Many sides. I mean, that's his thing.
Right. So, I mean, this is vintage. I think deleting the tweets is a little bit silly because obviously we all have a record of them. But that's exactly what he's going to do. And I noticed that Roy Moore said, don't think just because this president didn't support me that I don't support him. So all the players on this stage are sort of politically pliable when it comes to loyalties, at least, and probably not when it comes to ideology, to the misfortune of the sort of fair-minded people.
Oh, man, Mitch McConnell, that means Donald Trump is going to dump on you again. Heidi, not only did Moore win, but yesterday healthcare went down, and Bob Corker announced he was retiring. Let's talk about who this is worse for, Trump or McConnell. We know the answer is McConnell.
Hands down.
What's Bob Corker's plan here? Is Bob Corker going to primary Trump in a few years, or does Bob Corker just not want to run against whoever the alt-right candidate's going to be?
Well, what's really fascinating, Stephanie, is that if you dig down into the statement that Corker issued, he said at the end of it, I'm doing this because I believe the next 15 months of my service could be the most important of my entire career. So what exactly does that mean? It could mean he's the head of the Foreign Relations Committee, issues like North Korea, China, but it could also mean issues related to Russia and how this whole investigation goes down, and his criticism of Trump. I bring you back to just recently, a few weeks ago, Stephanie, where he said that he didn't think that the president was essentially prepared for and able for the presidency to serve. So we don't know what he means by that, but I was intrigued that he included that in his statement. And he's obviously someone who has been willing to speak his mind in the past. And just on a personal note, us reporters here in the Senate who run around, he's actually someone who's been very accessible to us, and I think will be potentially even more so going forward. It'll be interesting to watch.
Well, let me tell you, retirement looked good on Charlie Dent the other day. I mean, he was sitting back, relaxed, and happy to talk about the importance of foreign aid to places in Africa. And we know that's a tough argument to be made with this administration. We got to shift gears, though. Do you know why? Because it's tax reform day, and you write about it, the strategy behind selling it. Walk us through this. Do you see a contrast between this and how other proposals have been unveiled? Because Trump has talked a lot about tax reform, but he's never given any details. All he ever says is, it's going to be bad for me, it's going to be good for you when he gives speeches. But we don't know that. We've never seen any details. And just this week, I spoke to people inside the White House that said Trump hasn't picked up a pen. He hasn't done anything himself on tax reform.
Well, they do have a shell of a plan as opposed to with Obamacare, where he completely outsourced it to the Hill. And the second thing that they have are some of these outside grassroots groups that have been organizing around this literally for months, going around the country, holding town halls. And as opposed to healthcare, where they were essentially taking something away, they're talking about potentially giving something back here in the form of tax relief. That said, Steph, this is going to be a huge haul because they want to sell this as for the middle class. So this is where the details really matter, because what they're talking about here in terms of the plan that they're going to unveil today, we know is giving a corporate tax cut, and then on the other hand, slashing those individual rates. Well, by definition, when you do that for the top earners, they're going to get a bigger takeout. And then how are you going to handle issues, for example, like the estate tax? They want to do away with that. That's long been painted by Democrats as a giveaway for the rich. And basically, you know, it is for people only applying to estates worth more than $5 million. So at the same time, there are ways, Steph, that I think they could structure this to get some Democrats on board. I just spoke with one of those vulnerable red state Democrats, and they said, if they structure this the right way, we think there's a deal. We've told the president, for instance, there are certain things that must go. For example, that carried interest rate. For example, some of these things that they could claw back from people that are just seen as basically hands down benefits for the wealthy.
The carried interest. I wonder how Steve Schwartzman will feel about that, who, if you remember, was the head of President Trump's CEO council, and he is the co-founder of Blackstone. You know, President Trump talks about helping small businesses and what a benefit it would be, you know, for those who have an LLC. And we should point out that President Trump, I believe, has over 500 LLCs. So it would be a huge win for Trump and his family. But, Kate, can we really assess this deal? Like anything, if you look at the broad strokes or the general idea, lots of people can get behind it. But we don't know any details.
We don't know any details. We got a one-pager back in the spring that was roundly mocked.
I loved it. It was like a book report.
Right. We're going to get a slightly more detailed blueprint today, we think. And already we can see a gravitational pull away from the promises that President Trump has made, right? He said very recently he's sticking to this 15% corporate tax plan, but pragmatically speaking, none of his advisors actually working on that think this is realistic. They've been I mean, Steve Mnuchin personally believes in the 15% tax rate for corporations. I know that to be true, but he, Gary Cohn, and others are thinking 20 to 25% would be a win, and they're going to try to pull the president along with it. I think it's interesting. They were hoping that originally, I think that team was going to come up with a more detailed blueprint in August. Then they said, let's turn it over to the relevant congressional committees. Then we read that the Big Six, which is making these decisions, has a lot of dispute within itself and can't come up with consensus numbers. Big surprise there in our political climate. And so now, once again, we're probably going to see some ideals today.
You've got your fiscal hawks who already have concerns. One of the things I was reading sort of in the weeds is this idea of getting rid of deductions in certain states that are going to be big blue states. You're not going to have a lot of Democrats who are happy with that. All of this, like you mentioned, it's just cliff notes at this point. And when this presidency actually gets into the details, that's when we're going to see if he can actually negotiate with Congress. And so far, we haven't seen a big
problem with cliff notes. You might pass the test, but you pass it with like a C-. Wait, Heidi, I need you to weigh in on this. Just yesterday, I did an event with an economic advisor to the president during the campaign, Stephen Moore, who has stayed on this idea that the president has of a 6% GDP projection. I'd like to point out
for when
that if Gary Cohn still worked at Goldman Sachs and a single person who is an economist in the company walked into his office and said, I project 6% GDP, they would be laughed out of the building.
Well, that's always fun to make promises and to set goals. Behind the scenes, I did hear that the president the other night at a dinner on Monday, he's not talking about 6%, but he is talking about something in the area of 4%. And here's why I think this is going to be a little bit difficult, because the way
Did anyone ask him right after that what GDP stands for?
Well, and Mnuchin has paid lip service to 4%, I believe, within recent months. Isn't that right, Heidi?
Mnuchin has also said that Donald Trump has near-perfect genes.
Right.
Okay, back to that in a minute.
I just want to fact check. Yeah.
But the way that Trump is going to sell this is that he believes, and it really kind of plays into his personal grievance complex to a certain extent, that other countries are basically messing with us and have the advantage, and that really applies to the corporate tax rate. At the same time, they want to sell this as a middle-class tax cut, and yet it seems that the president is most fixated on this corporate tax cut, and that is the way to kind of get get our GDP back up to something like 4 or 5%. I don't hear anybody talking about 6%.
And sure, I think in recent weeks there's been talk, and we even saw echoes of this in the coverage overnight, of preserving the top individual tax rate at 39.6%, maybe leaving it as is because they just don't feel like that's where they have political wiggle room. Sorry.
Look, look, lowering taxes doesn't necessarily guarantee new hiring, and that's the real issue.
Right. That is, corporations have had more cash on the balance sheet in the last 5 years than you can shake a stick at. And what do? Share buybacks.
Yes.
They did nothing with it. There's not a guarantee that suddenly FedEx is going to build plants and buy planes.
Right.
Never.
Right.
All right, we're taking a break. Thank you all. Up next, Republicans prepare to unveil